The moment I realized my own children had forgotten my birthday wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no tears streaming down my face. Just me, sitting in my breakfast nook in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood, watching the morning light filter through lace curtains onto a table set for one. The coffee had gone cold in my cup. The small cake I'd bought myself, vanilla with buttercream, my favorite, sat untouched on the counter. 68 years old today, and the silence in my house felt heavy enough to crush my chest. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 3 hours later when my phone finally rang. Not with birthday wishes, but with my daughter Emma's voice, bright and urgent, asking if I could help with a down payment on her new condo. $22,000. The number hit me like a slap. I know what you're thinking right now. You're probably screaming at your screen, telling me I should have hung up immediately. But here's the thing about being a mother. We're conditioned to give until there's nothing left. We tell ourselves it's love, but sometimes love is just another word for bleeding yourself dry. Let me take you back 6 months to when this whole thing started unraveling. After my hip surgery in March, my children descended on my life like concerned vultures circling something wounded. Emma, my eldest at 42, arrived first with her perfectly highlighted hair and designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. My son David came next, 39, and already carrying that middle-aged thickness around his middle that reminded me of his father. They sat in my hospital room with faces so serious I thought someone had died. Emma held my hand, the first time she touched me voluntarily in months, and said those words that should have warmed my heart but instead sent ice down my spine. "Mom, you can't live alone anymore. It's not safe. We're worried about you." I remember staring at the fluorescent lights above my hospital bed, the ones that buzzed like angry insects, thinking how strange it was that this felt wrong. Shouldn't I be grateful? Shouldn't I feel blessed that my children cared enough to take time off work, to fly in, to sit by my bedside? But there was something in Emma's eyes that didn't match her words. A calculation. A coldness wrapped in concern. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the pain medication was making me suspicious of shadows. I wish I'd trusted that instinct. The recovery was brutal. My right hip felt like someone had replaced the joint with broken glass. Every movement was calculated, measured, accompanied by that metallic taste of pain medication and something else. Something bitter I couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe. Or the first whispers of suspicion. Emma moved into my guest room, claiming she needed to help me through the worst of it. She reorganized my kitchen, putting the dishes I'd kept in the same places for 30 years into new cabinets that made no sense. When I protested, she'd smile that patient smile you give to children who don't know any better. "Mom, you're just not up to making these decisions right now. Trust me." I trusted her. God help me, I trusted her. Those first weeks after surgery blurred together in a haze of physical therapy appointments and pill bottles lined up on my counter like soldiers. Emma drove me everywhere, controlling when we left. When we returned, who I could see. My friend Margaret called 3 times wanting to visit, and each time Emma answered my phone, her voice sweet as honey. "Oh, Mom's resting right now. She's not up for visitors. The doctor says she needs quiet." I didn't even know about those calls until weeks later when Margaret mentioned it at church. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked Emma that night. "You need to focus on healing, not entertaining," she said, not looking up from her phone. "I'm protecting you from stress." That should have been my first real warning. But when you're in pain, when every step sends lightning bolts through your leg, when you can barely dress yourself without help, you become grateful for anyone who'll cook your meals and drive you to appointments. You don't question their motives. You just survive, day by day, and tell yourself this dependence is temporary, that you'll get your life back once you heal. I didn't realize I was trading my independence for something far more valuable: my autonomy, my dignity, my right to make my own choices. David came by every evening after work, always with that briefcase he carried like a shield. He'd pull out documents, spread them across my dining room table, and explain things in that slow, deliberate voice that made me feel ancient. Power of attorney paperwork, he called it. Just a precaution, Mom, in case something happens. You know, with your condition. The way he said condition, like my aging body was a disease that might be contagious. I signed where he pointed. I didn't read the fine print. After all, these were my children. The babies I'd nursed through fevers and nightmares, the teenagers I'd driven to soccer practice and piano lessons, the young adults whose college tuitions I'd paid by working double shifts at the elementary school where I taught for 40 years. Surely they had my best interests at heart. I remember one evening in particular, about 3 weeks after the surgery. David had brought yet another stack of papers, his face serious in that way that made my stomach clench. Mom, we need to talk about your financial situation, he said, settling into the chair across from me like a businessman preparing for a difficult negotiation. Your financial situation? I repeated. I've been managing my finances since before you were born. David. I know, he said quickly, holding up his hands in that placating gesture. But things are different now. You're getting older, and these medical expenses. Mom, your savings account isn't as robust as it should be. The lie was so smooth, so believable. My savings account had over $80,000 in it, the result of decades of careful budgeting and the life insurance payout from my husband's death. But David spoke with such authority, such apparent concern, that I felt a flutter of doubt. Had I miscalculated? Had I spent more than I realized? Maybe I'm not remembering correctly, I said quietly, hating the uncertainty in my own voice. Exactly, David said gently. That's why we need to help you with this. That's why the power of attorney is so important. The thing about gaslighting is that it doesn't announce itself. It creeps in like carbon monoxide, invisible and deadly. By April, I couldn't make a single decision without one of them questioning it. I wanted to donate to the church building fund. Emma frowned and mentioned my fixed income. I considered joining a water aerobics class. David worried about me falling in the pool. I thought about finally taking that trip to see the Grand Canyon I'd been dreaming about since my husband died 8 years ago. They both exchanged glances that spoke volumes without words. Have you ever doubted your own sanity? Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered if you're losing your grip on reality? That's where I was by May, second-guessing every thought, every impulse, every tiny rebellion against their helpful suggestions. The worst part was how reasonable they made it all sound. They wrapped control in bubble wrap and called it concern. I started keeping a journal during those weeks, partly because my therapist had suggested it years ago, partly because I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I'd write down what I remembered, what they said I'd forgotten, trying to reconcile the two versions of reality. Tuesday, April 15th, I wrote. Emma says I forgot to pay the electric bill. I remember paying it online last week. She showed me a disconnect notice. Looked so worried. Maybe I'm confused about which bill I paid. Thursday, April 18th. David says I agreed to let him manage my investment accounts. I don't remember that conversation. He says we talked about it last week when I was tired. Was I tired? Am I forgetting important conversations? Reading those entries now breaks my heart. I can see myself slowly being eroded, my confidence crumbling entry by entry, question mark by question mark. But at the time, I genuinely believed I might be losing my mental clarity. That's what they needed me to believe. A confused elderly woman can't be trusted to manage her own affairs. A confused elderly woman needs her capable, successful children to step in and take control. For her own good, of course. Always for her own good. Then came that afternoon in June. I remember the exact date because it was the day before what would have been my 43rd wedding anniversary. Emma had left her phone on my kitchen table while she went upstairs to reorganize my closet. Another helpful project I hadn't asked for. The phone buzzed. I wasn't trying to snoop, I swear to you. But the screen lit up with a text from David, and I saw those words that would shatter everything I believed about my family. Make sure she signs the refinance papers today. We need to move fast before she changes her mind. My hands started shaking. Refinance papers? I hadn't agreed to refinance anything. My house had been paid off for 12 years, one of the few financial victories I'd managed after my husband's death. I picked up her phone, my arthritis making my fingers clumsy on the screen, and I opened that message thread. What I found there was worse than any nightmare I could have imagined. Months of messages, conversations about my assets, my house, my modest savings account, the small inheritance from my mother that I'd been careful to preserve. They discussed my failing memory. I didn't have a failing memory. They mentioned my confusion about finances. I'd balanced my own checkbook for 5 decades. They planned how to quietly transfer my house into their names, how to access my accounts, how to convince me to sign documents I didn't understand. My daughter, my firstborn, the baby I'd almost died bringing into this world, had written, "Once we have full control, we can finally stop pretending to care about her boring stories and complaints. She'll be taken care of in whatever facility is cheapest." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Once we have full control, stop pretending to care. Cheapest facility. Each phrase was a knife sliding between my ribs, precise and deadly. I scrolled further back, my breath coming in short gasps, and found more. Emma to David. She's so pathetic lately, constantly needing validation. I can barely stand spending time there. David to Emma. Just a few more months. Once the house is transferred, we can start liquidating. Mom won't even notice if we're careful. My vision tunneled. The bright kitchen around me seemed to darken at the edges. These were my children, the people I'd sacrificed everything for. Emma, who I'd rocked through colic for 6 months straight, barely sleeping, my body exhausted but my love infinite. David, who'd been so shy as a child that I'd spent hours helping him practice conversations, building his confidence word by word. I'd given them everything, my youth, my career opportunities, my dreams, my money, my time. And they were discussing me like I was an inconvenient obstacle standing between them and a payday. I couldn't breathe. The kitchen walls seemed to close in on me, the cheerful yellow paint I'd chosen 10 years ago suddenly sickly and wrong. I heard footsteps on the stairs, Emma coming back down, and I set the phone down with shaking hands, trying to arrange my face into something normal. But inside, something fundamental had broken. Not my heart. Hearts are resilient, capable of patching themselves together after almost any wound. No, what broke was deeper than that. It was my understanding of the world, my place in it, my belief that the love I'd poured into my children for 40-plus years had meant something more than an investment they were now cashing out. Emma walked into the kitchen smiling, oblivious to my shaking hands, my pale face. I'd become so good at hiding my feelings over the past months that even devastating heartbreak looked like normal exhaustion to her. "I found the cutest organizers for your closet," she said brightly, showing me pictures on her phone, the phone that held evidence of her betrayal. "They're on sale at Target. Should I pick them up for you?" Her voice was cheerful, casual, like we were just a normal mother and daughter discussing storage solutions. Like she hadn't just been texting about putting me in the cheapest facility she could find. "Sure," I managed to say. "That sounds nice." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. That night, after Emma left, I sat in the dark of my living room and cried for the first time since my husband's funeral. But these tears were different. They weren't the tears of grief or loss. They were the tears of someone waking up from a long, comfortable dream into a harsh reality where nothing was what it seemed. I looked around at the house I'd lived in for 35 years, the walls covered with family photos, and I realized I was looking at evidence of a fiction. Every smiling face in those frames was a lie. Every memory I'd treasured was contaminated by this new knowledge. They didn't love me. They never had. Or maybe they did once, back when I was useful, back when I could give without questioning. But somewhere along the way, I'd become nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle, standing between them and what they believed they deserved. The money, the fortune I'd supposedly been hoarding, the wealth they'd convinced themselves I was selfishly clinging to. $22,000 for Emma's condo. That's what she'd ask for on my birthday. I didn't know that yet, but I knew something was coming. You don't plan the kind of manipulation I'd seen in those texts without a specific end goal in mind. I walked through my house that night like a stranger, seeing everything with new eyes. The piano in the corner that I'd bought for Emma's lessons, scrimping and saving for 6 months to afford it. The frame drawing David had made in 2nd grade, hung with pride in my hallway for 30 years. The shelf full of photo albums documenting every birthday, every holiday, every milestone. Evidence of a lifetime of love that apparently meant nothing. Or worse, evidence that I'd been a fool, pouring affection into bottomless vessels that took and never filled. Sleep didn't come that night. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in months. I thought clearly, without their voices in my head telling me what to think. I was 67 years old, not ancient. My hip was healing. My mind was sharp. I'd raised 2 children alone after my husband died. Had put myself through graduate school in my 50s. Had managed a classroom of 32nd graders with wisdom and patience. When exactly had I become this helpless creature they made me feel like? The answer was simple and devastating. I hadn't. They'd just convinced me I had. I pulled out my laptop, the one Emma had suggested I stop using because the internet was too confusing for me, and I started searching. Elder financial abuse. The term felt clinical, impersonal, but the articles I found described my situation with eerie accuracy. Warning signs: isolation from friends and family, rapid changes in financial circumstances, unusual bank activity, new people showing excessive interest in the elder's assets, the elder becoming anxious or withdrawn. I checked off every single symptom. The National Center on Elder Abuse estimated that 1 in 10 Americans over 65 had experienced some form of elder abuse, and financial exploitation was the most common type. I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. I was a textbook case. By the time dawn broke over Lake Michigan, painting my bedroom windows with streaks of pink and gold, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. Because I knew what would happen if I did. They'd deny everything, twist my words, make me doubt what I'd seen with my own eyes. They'd perfected that particular skill over the past 6 months. No, I needed proof. I needed documentation. I needed to understand exactly what they'd already done and what they were planning to do. More importantly, I needed to protect myself before they realized I knew the truth. A betrayal this deep doesn't heal. It scars over, leaving tissue that's tougher than what was there before. The next morning, I did something that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. I put on my best church outfit, drove my car for the first time since the surgery, despite their warnings that I wasn't ready, and went to my bank. The young woman who helped me, Sarah, had kind eyes and didn't treat me like I was senile. I asked to see all the recent activity on my accounts, all the documents I'd signed in the past 6 months. She printed everything out, her expression growing concerned as the stack of papers grew thicker. "Mrs. Patterson," she said quietly, "are you aware that someone has been making significant transfers from your savings account? 5,000 here, 3,000 there, always just under the amount that would trigger automatic alerts. Over $40,000 in total moved into accounts I'd never authorized. My business profits, my income, my net worth, all slowly hemorrhaging while I'd been too drugged and manipulated to notice. The numbers swam before my eyes. $40,000. That was nearly half my savings, gone. Transferred to accounts bearing Emma and David's names, accounts I hadn't opened. Transfers I hadn't authorized. But I had given them power of attorney, hadn't I? Was this legal? Was I actually losing my mind, forgetting that I'd approved these transactions? Sarah must have seen the doubt creeping across my face because she leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Patterson, power of attorney doesn't give someone the right to transfer your money to themselves. That's called embezzlement, even when it's family, especially when it's family taking advantage of your trust. I sat in that bank office with papers spread across the desk like evidence at a crime scene, and I felt something shift inside me. The sadness, the hurt, the betrayal, all of it compressed into something harder, colder, more useful. Rage. Not the hot, explosive kind that makes you scream and throw things. This was ice-cold calculation, the kind of anger that plans instead of reacts. Sarah must have seen something in my face because she leaned forward and said, "Mrs. Patterson, I'm not supposed to do this, but there's a woman at our church who specializes in elder financial abuse. Would you like her number?" Elder abuse. The words hung in the air between us like an accusation. That's what this was, wasn't it? Not just children being greedy or impatient for their inheritance. This was systematic exploitation of someone they perceived as vulnerable. According to statistics Sarah shared with me, because apparently this kind young woman had dealt with similar cases, elder financial abuse affects 1 in 10 Americans over 65, costing victims nearly $3 billion annually. I wasn't alone in this nightmare. That thought should have been comforting, but instead, it filled me with a different kind of rage. How many other mothers, fathers, grandparents were sitting in their homes right now, being slowly bled dry by the very people they'd sacrificed everything to raise? I took the card Sarah offered me. Melissa Rodriguez, elder rights attorney, it read, with a phone number in neat print below. I called from the bank parking lot, sitting in my Honda with the air conditioning blasting, because even though it was only June, Chicago's humidity made the car feel like a sauna. My hands shook as I dialed. What if the attorney thought I was overreacting? What if she believed my children's version, that I was confused, incompetent, imagining things? But Melissa's voice, when she answered, was warm and professional and completely lacking in judgment. She listened to my story, all of it, the surgery, the gaslighting, the texts, the transfers, without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause, and I held my breath. Then she said 4 words that changed everything. "We can stop this. Not might be able to. Not will try. We can." She scheduled an appointment for the next day and told me not to sign anything else, not to let on that I knew what was happening, to act as normal as possible. The hardest performance of my life was about to begin. That evening, when Emma came by with dinner, she'd taken to bringing me meals, always with that martyr's sigh like it was such a burden. I smiled and thanked her. I ate the pasta she'd made and listened to her talk about her job at the marketing firm, about her boyfriend who was pressuring her to get married, about how expensive everything was becoming in Chicago. She complained about her rent, her car payment, her credit card bills, and I just sat there, nodding sympathetically, while inside my head I was screaming, "You have $40,000 of my money. You're planning to steal my house. You called me pathetic. You want to put me in the cheapest facility you can find." But outwardly, I was the concerned mother, the good listener, the easy mark she'd come to expect. I nodded in all the right places. I didn't mention the bank visit or the missing $40,000 or the text messages I'd seen. I played the role of the grateful, slightly confused elderly mother who needed taking care of. And I watched her, really watched her for the first time in months. I saw how her eyes would dart to the mail when she thought I wasn't looking, how she'd subtly steer conversations toward my finances, how she'd slip in little comments about my memory or confusion. Every word was calculated, every gesture designed to reinforce her narrative of my incompetence. This was someone I'd given birth to, had rocked through colic and teething, had taught to read and ride a bike and drive a car. This stranger wearing my daughter's face. There was a moment that evening I'll never forget. Emma was loading my dishwasher, another task she'd decided I couldn't handle properly, and she said casually, "You know, Mom, I was thinking it might be easier if I just had direct access to your checking account. That way I could pay your bills for you, and you wouldn't have to worry about remembering due dates." Her voice was so sweet, so concerned. The old me would have agreed immediately, grateful for the help. The new me, the one who'd read those texts, who knew exactly what she was planning, felt my stomach turn over. "Let me think about that," I said carefully. "I'm not sure I'm ready to give up that much control yet." She turned to look at me, and for just a second, I saw a flash of something in her eyes. Impatience? Frustration? It was gone so quickly I might have imagined it, replaced by that patient, indulgent smile. "Of course, Mom. Whatever makes you comfortable. But you know I'm just trying to help, right?" "I know," I said, and the lie tasted like poison. "I know you're trying to help." She squeezed my shoulder as she left. That casual gesture of affection, and I had to force myself not to flinch away. After the door closed behind her, I stood in my kitchen shaking, adrenaline and anger and grief all mixing together until I couldn't tell them apart. This was my daughter, my baby, the child I'd loved unconditionally for 42 years. And she saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between her and my money. After she left, I pulled out the file folder Melissa had given me and started documenting everything. Every conversation, every time they'd pressured me to sign something, every withdrawal from my accounts. I printed out those text messages from Emma's phone. I'd had the presence of mind to photograph them with my own phone before she came back downstairs that day. Evidence. Cold, hard, irrefutable evidence. And as I worked, late into the night with nothing but my desk lamp for company, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not over anyone else, but over my own life, my own choices, my own future. The meeting with Melissa the next day confirmed my worst fears and opened my eyes to realities I'd been too naive to imagine. Her office was in a modest building downtown, the walls lined with legal books and certificates. She was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed the documents I brought, bank statements, the power of attorney papers, printouts of the text messages, with a grave expression that told me everything I needed to know. This was bad, really bad. The power of attorney documents David had convinced me to sign. I hadn't given them limited power, I'd given them nearly complete control over my finances. The refinance papers Emma wanted me to sign would put my house in their names, with me as essentially a renter in my own home. They'd planned it perfectly, timed it to coincide with my surgery when I was most vulnerable, most dependent, most likely to trust them without question. Melissa explained that what they were doing wasn't just morally wrong. It was legally classified as exploitation of a vulnerable adult, a felony in Illinois, carrying penalties of up to 7 years in prison. She could help me revoke the power of attorney immediately, freeze my accounts to prevent further unauthorized transfers, and if I chose, pursue criminal charges against my own children. I felt the blood drain from my face. "I can't," I whispered. "I can't send my own children to prison." Melissa's expression softened. "Mrs. Patterson," she said gently, "I understand. Most people in your situation feel the same way. But you need to understand something. They're counting on that. They're counting on your love, your reluctance to hurt them, to protect them from consequences. The question is, who's going to protect you?" The thought made me nauseous, but the alternative, continuing to be their victim, was worse. We spent 3 hours going through my options, examining every document, building a case. Melissa explained that even if I didn't want to press criminal charges, I needed to protect myself legally, revoke the power of attorney, freeze the accounts, put legal barriers in place to prevent further exploitation, and most importantly, document everything going forward, keep records, record conversations. Illinois is a one-party consent state, which meant I could legally record without their knowledge, build an irrefutable case whether I decided to use it or not. I left her office with a plan and a sick feeling in my stomach. That evening, I signed the papers revoking David and Emma's power of attorney. Melissa filed them immediately, and just like that, their access to my accounts disappeared. They didn't know yet. They'd find out soon enough when they tried to make another withdrawal. I imagined their shock, their anger, their scrambling to figure out what went wrong. Part of me felt guilty. Most of me felt satisfied. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. During the day, I played my role perfectly. I let Emma fuss over me, let David bring more papers for me to review, papers I now photographed and sent to Melissa before politely declining to sign. I acted confused and grateful, and just a little bit foggy around the edges. But at night, I built my case. Bank statements, text messages, recorded phone calls. I recorded David explaining to me that I'd agreed to things I'd never agreed to, his voice so patient, so condescending. I recorded Emma casually mentioning how my memory seemed to be failing, dropping hints designed to make me doubt myself. Every conversation became evidence. Every lie they told me was preserved digitally, time-stamped, irrefutable. Melissa helped me understand that while exposing them publicly might feel good, the smartest move was to revoke their access quietly, protect my assets, and then decide how to proceed. But there was a part of me, growing stronger each day, that wanted more than just protection. I wanted them to feel what I'd felt. The shock, the betrayal, the sudden realization that the person you'd trusted most in the world had been systematically destroying you. I started noticing things I'd missed before. The way David would pocket small items from my house. A silver frame here, a piece of my mother's jewelry there. Things I might not notice missing immediately. Things he could sell without raising suspicion. The way Emma would intercept my mail, claiming she was helping me organize when really she was monitoring my finances, looking for opportunities. They'd been so careful, so systematic. This wasn't impulsive greed. This was a long-term strategy, probably planned for months or even years before my surgery gave them the perfect opportunity to accelerate their timeline. I found myself wondering when it had started. When had they first looked at me and seen a mark instead of their mother? Was it when my husband died and they realized I had life insurance money? Was it when they found out about my mother's inheritance? Or had it always been there, dormant, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge? I'd never know the answer to that question, and the not knowing was its own special torture. The opportunity came on a Thursday in late June. Emma had texted me that morning. Did I remember? Of course I remembered. She'd been dropping hints for weeks, building up to this moment. She wanted to bring her boyfriend over for dinner, she said. They had exciting news to share. I knew what the news would be. She needed money for a down payment on a condo in Wicker Park. $22,000, the exact amount I had left in my savings account after all their unauthorized withdrawals. This was their endgame. The final piece of their plan to leave me with nothing but my Social Security check and whatever allowance they decided to give me from my own money. I told her yes, of course, come over. I'd make my special lasagna, the one she'd loved as a child. I could hear the relief in her voice. She'd expected this to be harder. I spent that day cooking, not because I cared about impressing her boyfriend, but because I needed the ritual of it. The methodical layering of pasta and sauce and cheese, the familiar rhythm of measuring and mixing. This was muscle memory from decades of feeding my family, of nourishing them literally and figuratively. And tomorrow, I would serve them something different. Not food, but truth. Not comfort, but consequence. The lasagna went into the oven, filling my kitchen with smells that reminded me of happier times, or what I'd believed were happier times. Maybe they never existed. Maybe I'd been building my life on foundations of sand, and the whole structure had been unstable from the start. That thought should have broken me, but instead, it made me stronger. If nothing I'd believed was real, then I was free to build something new. something that didn't include children who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with an inconvenient heartbeat. I set the table with my good china, the dishes I'd received as wedding gifts 45 years ago. I polished the silver. I arranged fresh flowers in the centerpiece. If this was going to be the last meal I ever shared with my children, it would at least look beautiful. The performance required proper staging. They arrived at 6:30, Emma in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her boyfriend Marcus trailing behind her like an uncertain shadow. David came too, uninvited, with his wife Jennifer, who'd never bothered to hide her contempt for me. The whole family together for what they thought would be a celebration of their successful manipulation. Jennifer barely greeted me, immediately helping herself to wine from my cabinet like she owned the place. Marcus seemed uncomfortable, his eyes darting around, and I wondered how much Emma had told him. Did he know she was planning to scam her own mother? Or had she painted me as wealthy and generous, eager to help? We ate dinner making small talk, me playing my role so perfectly that I almost believed it myself. The confused elderly mother, grateful for her children's attention, pathetically eager to please. Emma told funny stories about her coworkers. David complained about his commute. Jennifer checked her phone every few minutes, bored by the whole charade. And I smiled and nodded and served more food, while inside my chest my heart pounded so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. When Emma finally cleared her throat and launched into her rehearsed speech about the condo, I watched her face carefully. She'd practiced this, I could tell. Her voice was bright with false enthusiasm, her gestures animated. "Marcus and I have found the perfect place," she said, showing me photos on her phone. "It's in Wicker Park, 2 bedrooms, and the location is ideal. But we need to move fast. The seller has other offers. If we could just get help with the down payment, we'd be able to secure it. $22,000. It's a lot, I know, but we'd pay you back. Well, maybe not pay you back exactly, but you'd be investing in our future, and someday this will all be mine anyway, right?" The casualness of that last sentence took my breath away. Someday this will all be mine anyway. Like my death was an inevitable event she was already planning for. Like my money was already hers, just temporarily locked in the vault of my living body. David jumped in to support her, his voice smooth and practiced. "It really is a good investment, Mom. And given your situation, it makes sense to help Emma now rather than waiting. You know, with your health issues, it's better to get your affairs in order sooner rather than later. Your health issues, my failing memory, your situation, all their coded language for I'm old and dying and might as well hand over the cash now." I let her finish. I even smiled. Then I excused myself to get dessert. What I brought back wasn't pie. It was a folder. A thick manila folder that I placed carefully in the center of the table, next to the half-eaten lasagna and the wine glasses Emma had poured without asking. I watched their faces as I sat back down, watched the first flicker of confusion, then worry, then fear. "You want $22,000? I said quietly, my voice steady despite my shaking hands. "Let's talk about money. Let's talk about the $40,000 you've already stolen from my accounts. Let's talk about the power of attorney you tricked me into signing while I was still groggy from surgery. Let's talk about these text messages where you discuss putting me in the cheapest facility you can find." I opened the folder and spread the evidence across the table like a poker player revealing a winning hand. Bank statements with highlighted withdrawals. Printed texts. Emma's words about not caring about my boring stories preserved in black and white. Recorded transcripts of phone conversations where David gaslit me about my own memory. Legal documents with highlighted sections showing exactly what they'd done. The color drained from Emma's face. David's expression shifted from confusion to understanding to panic in the span of seconds. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Emma's face went white, then red, cycling through emotions too fast to track. David's lawyer mask slipped, revealing panic underneath. Jennifer looked like she wanted to run. Marcus just stared at his plate, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. "You don't understand," Emma started, her voice shaking. "We were just trying to—" But I held up my hand, cutting her off. "No," I said. And my voice came out stronger than I'd heard it in months. "You don't understand. You don't understand that I know exactly what you've been doing. You don't understand that I've been documenting everything for 2 weeks. You don't understand that I've already revoked the power of attorney, frozen my accounts, and filed a report with Adult Protective Services. And you really don't understand that in Illinois, exploitation of a vulnerable adult is a Class 2 felony carrying up to 7 years in prison." The last sentence landed like a bomb. Emma made a choking sound. Marcus pushed his chair back from the table, physically distancing himself from the situation. Jennifer muttered something under her breath that sounded like, "I told you this was a bad idea." David found his voice first, his lawyer training kicking in even through the shock. "Mom, you're overreacting. We were just trying to help manage your finances. You're not well. You're confused. We have documentation showing you agreed to—" And there it was, the gaslighting playbook, right on cue. But this time, I had armor against it. "I'm not confused," I said, my voice like steel. "I'm 67 years old with a healing hip, not senile. I taught elementary school for 40 years, managed a household budget through recession and recovery, raised you two alone after your father died. I balanced my checkbook, paid my bills, and saved my money without anyone's help. The only confusion was why I let you convince me I was helpless. That stops now." Emma tried tears next, her face crumpling in that way that had always made me rush to comfort her. "Mom, please," she sobbed. "We're family. You can't do this to us. We were just trying to secure our future. You don't need all that money sitting in accounts. We have expenses, real life problems." "Family," I repeated, and I heard the bitterness in my own voice. "Is that what this is? Because family doesn't steal. Family doesn't plot to put their mother in the cheapest nursing home they can find so they can liquidate her assets faster. Family doesn't call her pathetic behind her back. Family doesn't forget her birthday, but remember to ask for $22,000 3 hours later." The moment I said it, Emma's crying stopped abruptly. "You remember," she whispered, and in that moment, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not fear of consequences, fear that her mask had been ripped away, that I'd seen the real her underneath. "I remember everything," I told her, my voice quiet but firm. "Every lie, every manipulation, every time you made me feel crazy for trusting my own judgment. Every withdrawal you made from my account without permission. Every conversation where you discussed me like I was already dead. Every moment you pretended to care while planning to rob me blind. And I want you both out of my house. Now." David stood up so fast his chair toppled backward, clattering against the hardwood floor. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising. "We have power of attorney. You gave us legal authority." "Had," I corrected. My voice calm despite my racing heart. Past tense. "I revoked it 2 weeks ago. Every account, every legal document giving you control over my life, all revoked." My lawyer filed the papers. "It's done. My house is my house. My money is my money. And you have no right to any of it. Not now, not ever. You both disgust me." The last sentence came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't take it back. I watched David's face cycle through denial, anger, and finally, something that looked almost like shame. Almost. He looked at me like he'd never seen me before, and maybe he hadn't. Maybe I'd been invisible to him for years, just a source of funds to tap whenever needed. The person staring back at him now wasn't that convenient fiction. She was someone who'd spent 6 months being dismantled and had chosen to rebuild herself as steel instead of glass. Jennifer was the one who said what they were all thinking, her face twisted with contempt. "You'll regret this," she spat. "When you're old and sick and alone, don't come crying to us for help. You're making a huge mistake, cutting off your own children. Who's going to take care of you when you can't take care of yourself? You'll die alone in some state facility, and it'll be your own fault. The threat was supposed to frighten me, but instead, It clarified everything. I looked at my daughter, my son, their spouses, and I felt nothing but exhausted relief. Better alone than exploited, I said calmly. Better lonely than robbed by my own children. Better isolated than gaslit into believing my own mind is failing. You're not taking care of me now. You're stealing from me. So what exactly would I be losing? They left then, a chaotic exodus of anger and tears and threats. Emma crying theatrical tears that might have moved me 6 months ago, her sobs echoing in my hallway as Marcus practically dragged her toward the door. David making vague threats about contesting the revocation, about proving I was mentally incompetent, about how I'd be sorry. Jennifer muttering about ungrateful old women and family loyalty. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. Marcus lingered for just a moment at the door, and he surprised me by saying quietly, "I'm sorry. I didn't know. She told me you were happy to help." "I believe you," I said, "and I meant it. Take care of yourself, Marcus, and maybe ask yourself what kind of person lies about scamming their own mother." He nodded, looking stricken, and left. And maybe he didn't know. Maybe Emma had lied to him too, painted me as some unstable old woman who needed managing, or as a wealthy grandmother eager to help. Or maybe he was just a coward who went along with whatever benefited him, and this was his moment of guilty conscience. Either way, I watched them all leave. Watched their car pull away from my house, headlights disappearing into the summer darkness, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Freedom. I closed the door and stood in my hallway, my legs shaking so badly I had to lean against the wall for support. It was done. I'd confronted them, exposed them, cut them out of my life. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the grief. Because even though they'd betrayed me, even though I'd done the right thing, they were still my children. Somewhere in Emma was the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. Somewhere in David was the boy who used to bring me drawings from school, so proud of his artwork. Those children were gone, replaced by strangers who saw me as a resource to exploit. But the love I'd felt for those children didn't disappear just because they'd changed. It curdled into something painful and complicated, a wound that would probably never fully heal. I walked back to my dining room and looked at the table. The beautiful meal I'd prepared, barely touched. The folder of evidence, papers scattered across the china. The chair where David had sat, still knocked over on the floor. This was the end of something, but it was also a beginning. I started cleaning up, methodical and slow, putting away food, washing dishes, restoring order to my space. With each task, I felt a little steadier, a little stronger. I'd done it. I'd stood up for myself. I'd refused to be a victim. That had to count for something. The legal fallout took weeks to sort through. With Melissa's help, I recovered most of the stolen money. It turns out that unauthorized transfers are relatively easy to prove when you have documentation. The bank flagged the accounts they'd moved funds into, froze them pending investigation. David and Emma both hired lawyers who tried to argue that I'd consented to everything, that I'd been confused about the arrangements, that they were acting in my best interests, but the text messages demolished their defense. Make sure she signs today before she changes her mind. Once we have full control, we can stop pretending to care. Those words, in black and white, told a story no lawyer could spin into innocence. Adult Protective Services opened an investigation. A kind social worker named Teresa came to my house, interviewed me for hours, reviewed all the documentation. She told me that what had happened to me was textbook financial exploitation, and that I'd been remarkably proactive in protecting myself. Most victims don't catch on until they've lost everything, she said. You're one of the lucky ones. I didn't feel lucky, but I understood what she meant. I still had my house, most of my savings, my independence. Many people in my situation lost everything. The state's attorney's office got involved, talking about potential prosecution. A stern-faced prosecutor named Michael Chen explained that elder financial exploitation was a serious crime in Illinois and that the state took these cases seriously. He wanted to pursue felony charges. I sat in his office, listening to him outline the case, and felt sick. Prison. My children could go to prison because of me, even knowing what they'd done. Even understanding they deserved consequences, the thought made me nauseous. In the end, I couldn't do it. I couldn't send my own children to prison, no matter how much they deserved it. Melissa argued with me, gently but firmly. "They'll do this to someone else," she said. "Without consequences, they'll learn they can get away with it." But I was firm. No criminal charges. We'd pursue civil remedies, recover the money, put legal protections in place. But I wouldn't destroy their lives the way they'd tried to destroy mine. Maybe that made me weak, or maybe it just made me a mother who couldn't completely kill the love she'd once felt, even for children who'd stopped deserving it. I watched it all unfold with a strange detachment, like I was observing someone else's life. It didn't feel real. My children being investigated for elder abuse, legal proceedings, lawyers arguing about theft and exploitation and competency. How had my life come to this? The hardest part wasn't the legal proceedings or the financial recovery. It was the silence. My phone, which had buzzed constantly with Emma's texts and David's calls, went dead. Mutual friends stopped reaching out, uncomfortable with the family drama, or perhaps believing whatever story my children were telling about their crazy, vindictive mother. I could imagine the narrative. Poor Emma and David, dealing with their unstable mother who'd turned on them for no reason, who'd accused them of terrible things because of her failing memory and paranoia. Some people would believe it. Some people always believed the younger generation over the older one. The isolation was real, and it hurt. But it was honest hurt, not the false warmth of manipulation disguised as love. I'd rather feel real pain than fake comfort. That's something I wish I'd understood decades ago. Sunday mornings were the worst. I'd sit in my usual pew at church, and I could feel the curious glances, the whispers, the Patterson family drama. Everyone knew something had happened, though the details were murky. Some people avoided me, others approached with careful sympathy, not quite sure what to say. My church community rallied around me, which surprised me. I'd mentioned to my prayer group what was happening, expecting judgment or awkward silence. Instead, they surrounded me with support that felt genuine. 3 other women shared similar stories of being exploited by adult children. One man talked about how his son had forged his signature on loan documents. Margaret, who'd been trying to visit me during my recovery, squeezed my hand and said she'd known something was wrong when Emma kept turning her away. "A mother's intuition," she said. "I knew you wouldn't refuse visitors unless someone was controlling who you saw." These were people I'd known for years, sitting in the same pews every Sunday, and I'd never known their secrets. We'd all been carrying our shame in private, as if family betrayal was something to hide rather than expose. But sitting in that prayer circle, hearing story after story that echoed my own, I felt less alone, less broken. We started meeting separately, our own small group of survivors, comparing notes and strategies and feelings. Patricia, whose daughter had stolen her house through a fraudulent deed transfer. George, whose son had run up credit cards in his name. Linda, whose granddaughter had cleaned out her retirement account. We were a club nobody wanted to join, but we found strength in each other. Through the church, I found my way to a support group for victims of elder financial abuse. Sitting in that circle of folding chairs in the community center basement, listening to stories that mirrored my own, I realized something profound. This wasn't about me being weak or stupid or a bad mother. This was about a systemic problem that affects millions of older Americans every year. According to the National Adult Protective Services Association, financial exploitation is the most common form of elder abuse, affecting approximately 1 in 10 Americans over 65. The estimated annual loss is somewhere between $3 and $37 billion. The range is so huge because most cases are never reported. Victims feel ashamed, afraid, or convinced by their abusers that they're the problem. I'd been all three. But sitting in that circle, sharing my story and hearing others, I understood that the shame belonged to the people who'd exploited me, not to me for trusting them. My birthday came and went without any contact from Emma or David. No card, no call, no acknowledgement that I'd existed for 68 years. Part of me had hoped, despite everything, that they'd reach out, that they'd apologize, show some remorse, prove that underneath the greed there was still some thread of genuine feeling. But silence was its own answer. They'd shown me who they really were, and I needed to believe them. The day felt heavy with absence, but I refused to spend it alone and miserable. That would be letting them win. Instead of spending the day alone, I invited the women from my support group to my house. We had cake, vanilla with buttercream, my favorite, and coffee, and we talked about rebuilding our lives after betrayal. Patricia brought flowers. Linda brought a card that made me cry, filled with genuine warmth and understanding. We sat in my living room, these women who'd become my chosen family, and celebrated not just my birthday, but our survival. One woman, Patricia, had been financially devastated by her daughter and grandson. She'd lost her house, her savings, everything. But she was working part-time at the library now, living in a small apartment, and she described herself as happier than she'd been in years. The things I thought were happiness, she said, were just the absence of conflict. Real happiness is having nobody steal from you, having nobody make you doubt your own mind. Being poor but free is better than being comfortable but controlled. Her words stayed with me long after the party ended, after the last guest had left and I'd cleaned up the cake plates and coffee cups. I'd spent so much of my life measuring success by the absence of problems. A good day was one where nobody was sick, nobody was fighting, nobody needed anything I couldn't provide. I'd confused exhaustion for contentment, obligation for love. Now, sitting in my house alone but on my own terms, I had space to ask myself what I actually wanted from life. Not what my children wanted from me, not what society expected of a woman my age, but what I wanted. The answer surprised me. I wanted to travel. I wanted to take that trip to the Grand Canyon I'd been dreaming about. I wanted to see the Pacific Ocean, visit national parks, maybe even take a cruise through Alaska. I'd spent decades planning my life around other people's needs, and I had maybe 20 or 30 good years left. I'd be damned if I was going to waste them being someone's ATM. I pulled out a notebook that night and started making lists, places I wanted to see, things I wanted to do, classes I wanted to take. I'd always wanted to learn to paint. Why not now? I'd thought about volunteering at the animal shelter. Why not start? For 40 years, I'd been a mother first, a teacher second, a person third. Now I could be just a person, and that person could want things, do things, be things that had nothing to do with taking care of others. I started planning. Small trips at first, a weekend in Milwaukee to visit the art museum, a week in Colorado Springs to see Garden of the Gods. My hip was healing well, better than the doctors expected, probably because I wasn't stressed and depressed anymore. The human body is remarkably resilient when you remove toxic influences. I joined a water aerobics class at the community center, something Emma had discouraged because of fall risk. The first day, I stood at the edge of the pool in my new swimsuit, feeling self-conscious and nervous. But the instructor, a cheerful woman named Rosa, welcomed me warmly, and the other participants, all women around my age, smiled and made room for me in the water. Turns out I didn't fall. I swam, I stretched, I felt my body growing stronger instead of weaker. After class, 3 women invited me to get coffee, and I said yes. Just like that, my social circle expanded. Studies show that social isolation and depression accelerate cognitive decline in older adults, while physical activity and social engagement do the opposite. I was proving that research correct in my own life, rebuilding myself one decision at a time. The physical transformation was external, but it reflected something deeper. I was reclaiming the body they'd treated as an inconvenient obstacle, turning it back into a source of strength. My hips stopped hurting as much. I had more energy. I slept better. It was as if my body had been waiting for permission to heal fully, and removing the stress of their manipulation had given it that permission. The legal proceedings culminated in September. David and Emma accepted a settlement to avoid prosecution. They returned all the stolen money plus interest, signed documents relinquishing any claim to my estate, and agreed to stay away from me unless I initiated contact. No jail time, which Melissa said was typical in these cases because prosecutors are often reluctant to imprison people for exploiting family members. The system, she explained, still clings to outdated ideas about family privacy and keeping these matters out of court. But at least I had my money back, my house was secure, and they couldn't legally contact me without my permission. The protection order felt both necessary and heartbreaking, a legal document saying my own children were a threat to my well-being. On one level, I'd won. I'd protected myself, recovered my assets, ensured my financial security for the rest of my life. But on another level, I'd lost the fantasy I'd been clinging to, the belief that somewhere underneath their greed and manipulation, Emma and David still loved me. Maybe they had once. Maybe there'd been a version of them that genuinely cared, before entitlement and resentment twisted them into people I didn't recognize. Or maybe I'd been fooling myself all along, seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was really there. That's the thing about this kind of betrayal. It doesn't just hurt in the present. It rewrites your past, makes you question every memory, every moment you thought was genuine. Did Emma ever actually want to spend time with me, or was every visit calculated to maintain access? When David called on Sundays, was he checking on my well-being or just monitoring his investment? Had any of our relationship been real, or had it all been performance? I'll never know the answers to those questions, and that uncertainty is its own kind of grief. I found myself going through old photo albums, looking at pictures of their childhoods, trying to pinpoint when things went wrong. Was it when I paid for Emma's graduate school instead of making her take out loans? Was it when I gave David money for his first house down payment? Had I created their sense of entitlement by giving too freely, by never making them work for what they received? Or was it something deeper, some fundamental failure in how I raised them, some lesson about empathy and gratitude that I failed to teach? I looked at a photo of 5-year-old Emma, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a drawing she'd made for me. I'd kept that drawing for 37 years, framed in my hallway. Looking at it now felt like looking at a stranger. That little girl and the woman who'd called me pathetic seemed like different people. Maybe they were. Maybe something had broken in her along the way, something I'd missed or couldn't fix. Melissa, in one of our final meetings, said something that helped. You can't make people have a conscience, Mrs. Patterson. You can only control your own choices. Some people are broken in ways that no amount of good parenting can fix, and some people simply become entitled, convinced they deserve everything without earning it. You gave your children every advantage: education, stability, love, support. What they chose to do with those advantages is on them, not you. Her words didn't erase the pain, but they did ease the guilt. I'd spent months wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have done differently. But the truth was simpler and harder. I'd done nothing wrong except trust too much, give too freely, and believe that sacrifice automatically earned love. Those were mistakes of generosity, not cruelty. I could forgive myself for those mistakes. By October, I'd settled into a new rhythm of life. I woke up when I wanted, ate what I wanted, spent my money on experiences instead of obligations. I booked that trip to the Grand Canyon for November, a 2-week adventure that would take me through Arizona, Utah, and Nevada. When I told my support group, they cheered like I'd announced winning the lottery. Patricia even pulled me aside afterward and said, "You're doing what we're all afraid to do. You're living. Don't underestimate how radical that is for women our age. We're supposed to shrink, to fade, to make ourselves smaller and smaller until we disappear. You're expanding instead." And she was right. Every choice I made to prioritize myself felt like a small act of rebellion against a lifetime of conditioning that told me my worth was measured by how much I gave others. The day I left for my trip, I did something I'd been putting off. I wrote letters to Emma and David, not angry screeds or detailed accusations, just simple, honest letters saying what I needed them to know. I wrote about the hurt, yes, but also about forgiveness, not for their sake, but for mine. I explained that I'd chosen to move forward with my life, that I hoped someday they'd understand what they'd done and why it was wrong, but that I wasn't waiting for that understanding to be happy. I told them I loved the children they'd been, grieved the adults they'd become, and released them to live their lives without my involvement. I didn't mail those letters immediately. I left them on my desk, sealed and stamped, as a reminder that I'd said my piece. Whether they ever read the words didn't matter as much as the fact that I'd written them. Sometimes closure isn't something someone else gives you. Sometimes you have to create it yourself. The Grand Canyon exceeded every expectation. Standing on the south rim at sunrise, watching light paint impossible colors across ancient rock, I felt something shift inside me. The canyon had been carved over millions of years by water and wind, slowly eroding away layers of stone to reveal beauty in the depths. That's what this past year had been for me, an erosion of illusions. Painful, but necessary, exposing something stronger underneath. I wasn't the same woman who'd sat in her breakfast nook 6 months ago, crying over a forgotten birthday. That woman had believed her children's love was her identity, her purpose, her reason for existing. This woman, standing in the November wind with a camera around my neck and freedom in my heart, knew better. Her identity was her own, her purpose was whatever she chose, and her reason for existing didn't require anyone's approval. I spent 3 days at the Grand Canyon, hiking the trails my hip would allow, sitting on the rim watching the light change, talking to other travelers. There was something humbling about standing before something so vast and ancient. My problems felt smaller there, more manageable. Yes, my children had betrayed me. Yes, I'd lost the family I thought I had. But I was still here, still breathing, still capable of feeling awe and joy. That had to count for something. I met people on that trip, other travelers, some alone like me, some in couples or groups. We shared meals and stories, and I found myself talking about my experience without shame. The funny thing about being honest is that it invites honesty back. A man named Robert, retired from teaching like me, told me about his son who'd asked to borrow money for a business venture and then disappeared with $100,000. A woman named Helen described her daughter's drug addiction and how much money she'd lost trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. We were all carrying variations of the same wound, the specific pain that comes from being hurt by someone you'd die to protect. But we were also all choosing, in different ways, to keep living despite that pain. That choice, to continue and to find joy after betrayal, was its own form of courage. Robert and I stayed in touch after the trip ended, exchanging emails about our travels, our healing processes, our attempts to build new lives from the rubble of old ones. He'd joined a hiking group in Oregon, he told me, and was planning to hike parts of the Pacific Crest Trail. His son had reached out once, asking for money again, and Robert had said no. That simple boundary, he wrote, had been terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I understood exactly what he meant. When I returned home in late November, I found a message on my answering machine. Emma's voice, small and uncertain in a way I hadn't heard since she was a child. "Mom, I know I don't have the right to call, but it's Thanksgiving next week, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just sorry I got caught. Sorry for all of it. I've been seeing a therapist, and she's helping me understand how entitled and cruel I've been. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that I'm starting to understand what I did to you, and I'm ashamed. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I love you." I listened to that message 3 times, analyzing every word, trying to determine if it was genuine or just another manipulation. The old me would have called back immediately, eager to rebuild, terrified of permanent estrangement. The new me sat with the message for a week, letting my feelings settle before responding. I talked to my support group about it. Patricia advised caution. Linda thought I should give her a chance. Teresa from Adult Protective Services, who I'd stayed in touch with, suggested requiring proof of change before allowing her back into my life. "Therapy is good," she said, "but words are cheap. You need to see sustained behavioral change over time, not just an apology when she's facing legal consequences." I did eventually call her back, but on my terms. I told her I appreciated the apology, that I hoped she was getting the help she needed, but that I wasn't ready for a relationship yet. "Maybe someday," I said, "but not now. I need more time, and I need to see consistent change, not just words. If you're really in therapy, keep going. Work on yourself. Figure out why you thought it was acceptable to treat me that way. And maybe in a year or 2, if you've actually changed, we can talk again." But I'm not making any promises. She cried on the phone, and part of me wanted to comfort her the way I had when she was small. But I'd learned the hard way that my instinct to soothe and protect had been weaponized against me. So I let her cry, told her I hoped she'd continue therapy, and ended the call. It wasn't closure exactly, but it was a beginning. The beginning of boundaries, of self-protection, of refusing to sacrifice my peace for someone else's comfort, even when that someone was my daughter. David never called, never apologized. According to Emma, we had brief phone conversations every few weeks, careful and formal. He'd convinced himself that I was the villain in this story, that I'd overreacted, destroyed the family over a misunderstanding, was being vindictive and cruel. His wife, Jennifer, had reinforced that narrative, apparently, creating an echo chamber where they were the victims of my unreasonable behavior. I realized I could live with that. I couldn't control what story David told himself to sleep at night. I could only control my own truth and who I allowed into my life. If he needed to paint me as the bad guy to avoid confronting his own actions, that was his burden to carry, not mine. The freedom of letting go of his opinion, of releasing my need for his understanding, was extraordinary. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to manage anyone's feelings, but my own. Christmas came and went quietly. I spent it with my church community, volunteering at a shelter where we served meals to people experiencing homelessness. There was something grounding about that work, about serving people whose needs were immediate and whose gratitude was genuine. A woman named Louise, probably in her 70s, told me her children had kicked her out after her husband died, fighting over his modest life insurance payout. She'd been living in her car for 3 months before finding space in the shelter. I gave her my phone number and told her about the support groups, the resources, the legal help available. She looked at me like I'd handed her a lifeline, and maybe I had. That's the thing about surviving exploitation. It gives you a roadmap to help others navigate the same darkness. My pain had become something useful, something that could light the way for someone else. Louise and I met for coffee a week later. She was staying at the shelter, working with a social worker to get back on her feet. I connected her with Melissa, who took her case pro bono. Within 2 months, Louise had recovered some of her money and found an affordable apartment. Helping her heal helped me heal. It gave purpose to my pain, transformed my experience from pointless suffering into something that could benefit others. As the new year approached, I found myself thinking about what I'd learned from this whole nightmare. The lessons weren't simple or comfortable, but they were true. I learned that love without boundaries is just exploitation with better PR. I learned that sacrificing yourself doesn't make others grateful. It just teaches them you're willing to be sacrificed. I learned that the word family can be used as a weapon just as easily as a comfort. I learned that getting older doesn't mean becoming helpless, invisible, or irrelevant unless you accept that narrative. I learned that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones you'd never suspect, and that betrayal from someone you love doesn't mean love itself is worthless. It just means you loved someone who didn't deserve it, and there's no shame in that. The shame belongs to the person who exploited that love for profit. If you're listening to this and seeing yourself in my story, I want you to understand something. You are not crazy. You are not imagining things. You are not being too sensitive or overreacting. If something feels wrong in how your family treats you, trust that feeling. Look at the patterns, not the individual incidents. Document everything: texts, emails, bank statements, conversations. Knowledge is power, and in situations like mine, it's also armor. And if you discover that people you love are exploiting you, you have options. Legal recourse exists. Support systems exist. You don't have to suffer in silence or accept that this is just how families are. Exploitation is exploitation, regardless of whether it comes from strangers or your own children. The law recognizes this. Support services exist to help, and you deserve better. Here are some concrete warning signs to watch for. Things I wish I'd recognized earlier. First, isolation. If your adult children or family members are subtly cutting you off from friends, other family, or community, that's a red flag. Exploiters need you isolated to maintain control. Second, urgency. If someone is pressuring you to sign documents quickly, make financial decisions without time to think, or telling you that you need to act now before you change your mind, that's manipulation. Legitimate help doesn't come with deadlines that pressure you. Third, gaslighting. If you're constantly being told you're confused, misremembering, or not understanding things correctly, especially about your own finances or decisions, trust yourself. You know your own mind. Fourth, unexplained financial changes. Missing money, unauthorized transactions, accounts you don't recognize. These aren't innocent mistakes. They're theft. According to the National Council on Aging, only 1 in 44 cases of elder financial abuse is ever reported. 1 in 44. That means the vast majority of victims suffer in silence, either unaware they're being exploited or too ashamed to seek help. The estimated injuries from elder abuse cost American hospitals over $5 billion annually, and that's just the direct medical costs. It doesn't account for the psychological damage, the broken relationships, the years stolen from people who should be enjoying their later life in peace. We need to talk about this more openly, without shame or stigma. We need to recognize that exploitation of older adults is a criminal justice issue, not a private family matter. And we need to support victims in coming forward, in protecting themselves, in rebuilding their lives after betrayal. If you're in a situation like I was, here are practical steps you can take. First, get your legal documents in order with an attorney you choose independently, not someone your children recommend. Make sure your power of attorney is limited and specific, with clear oversight built in. Second, monitor your finances closely. Check your accounts regularly, set up alerts for transactions, and don't give anyone access to your accounts without clear documentation of what they're allowed to do. Third, maintain relationships outside your immediate family. Isolation makes you vulnerable. Stay connected to friends, community groups, religious organizations, anyone who can provide perspective and support. Fourth, trust your instincts. If something feels off, investigate. You're not being paranoid or suspicious. You're being careful, and that's wisdom, not weakness. The most important lesson I learned is this: your worth is not measured by what you can give others. You are valuable because you exist, because you have lived a life full of experience and wisdom and resilience. Your money is yours. Your house is yours. Your choices are yours. You don't owe your adult children an inheritance, a down payment, a bailout, or access to your resources just because you're related. Love that has to be purchased isn't love. It's a transaction, and you deserve better than to be someone's ATM with an inconvenient heartbeat attached. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, protecting yourself isn't cruel, and cutting off people who exploit you, even if they're family, isn't something to feel guilty about. It's survival, and survival is always justified. Today, as I sit here telling you this story, I'm planning my next adventure. Alaska in the summer, maybe, or a road trip down the California coast. I have my health, my independence, my house, and my peace of mind. I have friends who value me for who I am, not what I can provide. I have a relationship with Emma that's cautious and careful, but slowly rebuilding based on honesty instead of obligation. I've accepted that David and I may never reconcile, and I'm okay with that. His choices are his own, and I can't force him to see what he refuses to acknowledge. What I can do is live my life fully, spend my resources on experiences that bring me joy, and refuse to shrink myself to make others comfortable. That's the inheritance I'm leaving. Not money, but an example of a woman who refused to be diminished. So I want to ask you, wherever you are right now, whatever city you're listening from,